After my son kicked me out, I cut off his wife's credit cards and received a screaming call. Who is going to pay for these things? My name is Élise Dubois. At 68, I thought I would live out my final years in peace. After my husband passed away, my only son, Antoine, and his wife, Jessica, moved in with me. To take care of you, mother, they said. This small house in Provence, where my late husband and I built every brick and planted every rosebush together, should have been warmer. But now, it had become a silent battlefield, where every day I had to fight loneliness and humiliation. I used to be a gentle, always smiling mother. But sometimes when I looked in the mirror, I no longer recognized myself. The conflict began with small things, the daily indignities I endured. One afternoon I returned from the market, my arms heavy with fresh groceries for dinner. The scent of baked bread was still fragrant, but fatigue weighed down my shoulders. As I stepped into the familiar kitchen, where I had spent my entire life preparing meals for my family, I saw Jessica sitting there. Her long, slender legs were propped up on the antique oak table my father had left me, a cherished heirloom. Her bare, shoeless feet rested directly on the polished wood surface. She was leisurely painting her nails, a bright red, the pungent chemical smell permeating the room, overpowering even the fresh vegetables I had just bought. She did not even bother to look up at me. She simply spoke, her voice deceptively sweet, but her words sharp as knives, full of contempt and command. Mother, please prepare dinner for Jessica. You know, I am a bit tired today. I stood there, in my own kitchen, feeling my bones ache after a long day. I looked at my calloused hands, fingers that had worked tirelessly my whole life, then at her perfectly manicured, blemish-free nails. That contrast, like a stab, cut into my mind. I said nothing. I simply bowed my head, placed the heavy bags of groceries on the cold floor, and began the work of an unpaid servant in my own home. The clatter of knives and cutting boards blended with the silence and the unpleasant smell of nail polish. Tonight's dish was a stew that Antoine loved, but I knew it would never taste the same. That evening, the stew that Antoine used to love now tasted bland. I ate in silence, trying to ignore Jessica's unpleasant glances. Afterwards, I cleared the table and washed the dishes mechanically. When I entered the living room, I saw Antoine and Jessica already seated, watching TV. The TV was quite loud, as if deliberately trying to drown out all other sounds. Darling, Jessica said, her voice soft, but I knew she wanted me to hear. I cannot take it anymore. I know Mother is old, but I cannot stand an old senile woman constantly interfering in our private lives. I have no personal space. If this continues, I will go crazy. Antoine, the son I had sacrificed my life to raise, turned to look at me. I saw a fleeting hesitation in his eyes, a glimmer of the child he once was, but then it vanished, replaced by an irritated and tired expression. He had made his choice. Mother, he said, his voice lowered, you have to understand. Jessica needs her space. We, as a couple, also need our privacy. If you do not accept. He left the sentence unfinished, but his gaze did not. He looked straight at me, and I understood its clear meaning. If I did not accept their arrangements, I would have to leave. Jessica smiled faintly, a small, victorious smile. I looked at my son's unfamiliar face. I did not argue. I did not beg. Tears were a luxury now. I simply offered a calm, faint smile, a smile that, I knew, would haunt them for a long time. I stood up, without a word. I went into my bedroom, the room where I had slept for 30 years. I picked up my old handbag, the only thing I still owned. I took nothing else. All the mementos, the photos I left behind, they held no meaning when the soul of the house was dead. I returned to the living room. Antoine and Jessica looked at me in surprise. Where are you going, Mother? Antoine asked, his voice a little confused. I did not answer. I walked past them, out the front door. Mother! Antoine called after me, his voice beginning to panic slightly. Where are you going? You cannot just leave like that. You have nowhere to go. I did not turn around. I walked out of the house to which I had dedicated my life, the house that had now become a cage. I walked out of their lives, straight into the darkness of the night. I walked on, aimlessly, in the cold Provence night, letting the last tears dry on my cheeks. Eventually, I found a small inn on the edge of town, a place with warm yellow light spilling from the windows. I rented a room. The room was tiny, the furniture old, and it smelled musty. The iron bed creaked when I sat down. But when I closed the door behind me, when I locked the bolt, for the first time in months, I felt I could breathe. No judging eyes, no commanding words, just me and four walls. The next morning, I woke up as the first sunlight streamed through the single window. I sat by the window, looking out at a small, bare vineyard, its gnarled rows reaching up to the blue sky. This place was not luxurious, but it was mine. The silence here was not the silence of solitude, but of peace, a peace I had lost for a very long time. And in that peace, I began to act. I took out my old phone and called the bank, where my husband and I had deposited our money for so many years, where the fruits of our life's labor were kept. "Hello, this is Élise Dubois," I said, my voice no longer trembling but clear and decisive. "I would like to cancel all monthly automatic transfers to Antoine Dubois' account number." "Understood, madam," the teller on the other end said. "Next," I continued, "I would like to immediately block the supplementary credit card in Mrs. Jessica Dubois's name." With each request made, each command given, I felt as though I was shedding a chain, the invisible shackles of dependence and exploited kindness that had bound me for so long. And then, the chaos began. My phone started ringing incessantly. First came a message from Antoine just hours later. "Mother, Jessica's credit card is blocked. Is there a mistake? Where are you?" I did not reply. A few minutes later, a call. I did not answer. My voicemail quickly filled with messages. Antoine's voice was pleading, anxious. "Mother, where are you? What are you doing? You cannot do this. Do you know how we are going to live?" Then came Jessica's turn. She did not plead. She screamed into the phone, her voice shrill and full of hatred. "You crazy old woman! What do you think you are doing? You cannot do this. My rent, my living expenses, my shopping. Who is going to pay for those things?" I remained silent. I just sat there by the window, calmly looking out at the vineyard. I let them fall into the chaos they had created for themselves. They had grown accustomed to living off my efforts. Now, with that supply cut off, they finally realized how truly helpless they were. Their play was over. Now it was time for my own play to begin. Weeks passed. The chaos of Antoine and Jessica's calls and messages gradually subsided. Perhaps they had realized that pleading or threatening was futile. I began to get used to my new life. One morning, I went for a walk and stopped by the old bakery in the town centre, a place my husband and I used to frequent. As I was choosing pastries, a familiar voice spoke up. "Élise, is that you?" It was Madame Celeste, my old friend, the bakery owner. She looked at me, both surprised and concerned. "Good heavens, Élise! I heard you had moved out. You look so thin." We sat down at a small table. After a few inquiries, Madame Celeste suddenly lowered her voice, looking around as if afraid someone might overhear. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Élise, there is something. I have kept to myself for a long time. I do not know if I should say it, but now—" "Just say it, Celeste," I said, feeling a sense of unease. "Do you remember the night your husband, Mr. Dubois, had his car accident?" she began. I nodded, my heart tightening. "That night," she continued, whispering, "my nephew, who worked at the pub near that bend, said he saw that girl." "Which girl?" I asked. "Jessica," Madame Celeste replied. "Antoine's wife now. At that time she was not his wife. Just a young girl who used to hang around the pub, where Antoine was working part-time to earn money for his studies." I was stunned. My nephew said he saw Jessica very close to the scene of the accident, just moments before it happened, Madame Celeste said, her eyes full of concern. At the time, no one thought much of it. But later, when she quickly became Antoine's girlfriend, and then his wife, people started whispering. There were rumors that she had tampered with your husband's car, that she had damaged the brakes. But no one had any proof, so no one dared to speak out. I sat motionless on the chair in the bakery. The fragrant smell of baked bread around me seemed to vanish. The blood in my veins felt like it had frozen. Jessica, at the scene, on that fateful night. A series of images flashed through my mind. Jessica's first visit to my house, a few weeks after the funeral, with Antoine. Her eyes then, full of sympathy and shared grief. A perfectly feigned sympathy. The image of her slowly entering Antoine's life, then mine, becoming an indispensable part of the family. It was not an accident after all. It was not fate. For a long time, even before my husband passed away, she had a plan. She had found a way to insinuate herself into my life, into Antoine's life. And my husband's death, perhaps, was the first step in that plan. I trembled as I thanked Madame Celeste and hurried away. I did not return to my inn-room. I went straight to my old house. I knew Antoine and Jessica would not be there at this hour. I used the spare key I always kept and slipped inside. I went straight to my husband's study, where I still kept old papers. I rummaged through a dusty stack of files, and I found it. The police report on the accident. Clipped inside was a handwritten note from Mr. Martin, the old mechanic in the area, who had been invited by the police to inspect the car at the scene. Most of the details were technical. I did not fully understand them. But then, my eyes stopped at a small note at the bottom of the page, circled in pencil. Brake line shows signs of tool interference, not natural wear and tear. No one had paid attention to that detail. The case had been quickly closed as a normal traffic accident due to slippery roads. But I was different. For me, this was no longer a rumor or a suspicion. This was a confirmation. A cold and cruel confirmation. The monster I had harbored in my house was not just wicked. She was a murderer. The next morning, I was no longer a fleeing old woman. I took the mechanic's note and went straight to the police station. I requested to speak directly with Inspector Dubois, a woman known for being tough and uncompromising. I explained everything to her, from being kicked out of my house, to cutting off their finances, to Madame Celeste's testimony, and finally to the technical note. Inspector Dubois listened attentively. When I mentioned the name Jessica, she frowned. Jessica Thompson? She asked again. That name is not unfamiliar. She was once investigated in another city for similar fraudulent behavior, targeting wealthy older men. But each time, we never had enough evidence. She looked at me, her eyes stern. But this time, Mrs. Dubois, with what you have provided, we will reopen the investigation, officially. Perhaps sensing something, a few days later, Antoine and Jessica came directly to my inn-room. This time, there were no screams. Jessica entered, her eyes red-rimmed, and fell to her knees at my feet. "Mother! Mother! Forgive me!" she cried. "I know I was wrong. I had postpartum depression. That is why I treated you like that. I am pregnant, Mother. You are going to have a grandchild. Please do not make a big deal out of this, okay, Mother? Think of your grandchild." Antoine chimed in, begging me for family happiness. It was a perfect act, targeting the love of a mother, a grandmother. But I was no longer the gentle Élise of old. I looked straight into her eyes, the eyes that were trying to appear pitiful. "Jessica," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "Have you forgotten that before I left the house, I was the one who picked up your medication every month?" Jessica's expression stiffened. "And have you also forgotten," I continued, "that after hearing how you treated me like a servant, I switched your birth control pills with vitamin supplements?" I paused, letting the truth sink in. "You are not pregnant, Jessica." Jessica was speechless, her face as white as a sheet of paper. Antoine was stunned. He turned to look at his wife, then back at me, not understanding what was happening. Her last mask had been torn off by my own hands. Jessica's crying and Antoine's shock attracted the attention of curious neighbours. The door to my inn-room was still open, and several people had already gathered in the hallway. This was the moment. I no longer spoke to them privately. I stepped to the door, my voice ringing out clear and firm, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Everyone, listen up," I said, pointing at Jessica, who was still sitting stunned on the floor. "This woman, Jessica Thompson, is not just a liar, not just someone who destroyed my family. She is also involved in the death of my husband many years ago." A gasp of astonishment arose from the crowd. Antoine looked at me as if I had gone mad. What are you saying?" Jessica stammered. "I am talking about this technical note." I held up the mechanic's paper. which says that my husband's car brakes were tampered with. I am talking about the witness testimony that saw you at the scene that night, I continued, giving them no chance to react. And I am talking about your fraudulent activities in other cities. Just then, Inspector Dubois, who had been standing in a hidden corner all this time, stepped out. She stood right behind me, a powerful affirmation. What Mrs. Dubois says is true, she declared, her voice stern. The police department has officially reopened the investigation into Mr. Dubois' death, and Miss Jessica Thompson is the primary suspect. That was the final blow. Jessica had no more words of defense. She just sat there, trembling, her eyes wide with horror. A police officer stepped forward and handcuffed her on the spot. Antoine stood there, numb, watching his wife being led away by the police. Then he turned to look at me, his eyes filled with confusion, guilt, and collapse. It was as if he had just woken up from a long nightmare and realized that the monster in that dream had always been right beside him. His world, built on Jessica's lies, had completely shattered. Jessica's trial was swift. With Madame Celeste's testimony, the mechanic's technical note, and her record of past fraudulent activities, the jury did not take long to deliver a verdict. Jessica faced a lengthy prison sentence for manslaughter and fraud. Antoine was not prosecuted, but his life had also collapsed. He lost his job. His reputation in this small town was ruined, and most painful of all, his trust was completely shattered. He had lost everything, simply because he had blindly believed a monster. A few weeks after the trial, my lawyer informed me that, as husband and wife, the house in Provence was still co-owned, but I did not return. I could not. That house, once filled with happy memories, was now tainted by betrayal and even blood. I decided not to reclaim it. Instead, I arranged to donate the entire house and land to a local charity, an organization that helps women who have lost everything, just like me. That house would no longer be a place of pain, but would become a refuge, a new beginning for others. It was the best way for me to honor my husband's memory. Months passed. I still lived in my small inn-room, finding peace in simple things. I had thought I would never hear from Antoine again, but then one afternoon the mailman brought a letter. I immediately recognized my son's messy handwriting on the envelope. My hand trembled slightly as I opened it. The letter was not long. It did not beg for money. It did not justify his actions. It was simply an apology. "Mother," it read, "I do not know where to begin. I was blind. I let her blind me, believed her lies. I did not just hurt you, Mother. I betrayed your trust, and I betrayed Father's memory. I do not dare to ask for your forgiveness. I just want you to know that every day I live in regret. I have lost everything, and I deserve it. But what hurts me most is that I have lost you. If you can give me one chance, just one, to see you again, to apologize directly, I want to mend what I have broken." I folded the letter, went out onto the porch, and looked out at the vineyard in harvest season. I looked at the thorny rose bushes I had planted, the flowers still blooming red, strong and resilient. I had lost so much: a husband, a home, and almost a son. But I had also found myself again, found a strength I did not know I possessed. I went back inside, sat down at the table, took out a blank sheet of paper and a pen. I thought for a long time, then began to write. "Son," I wrote, "I will come. But this time, we will start over. No more money, no more lies, only truth and respect. If you are ready for that, then so am I." I sealed the letter, feeling a sense of relief. The wound was still there, but perhaps it was time for it to begin to heal. A year later, I no longer lived in the tiny inn-room. I had used some of my savings to buy another small house, also in Provence, with a garden large enough for me to plant my thorny rose bushes. My reunion with Antoine was not easy. There were awkward silences, there were tears of regret, but we were patient. We started over, little by little. He found a normal job, working as a carpenter in a small workshop, honest manual labor. He no longer pursued luxurious dreams. He said that working with his own hands helped him find peace again. On weekends, he often came to visit me. We did not talk much about the past. Instead, we gardened together, mended fences, or simply sat in silence drinking tea. Antoine was learning again how to be a son, and I too was learning again how to be a mother. One afternoon, as we were sitting on the porch, he turned and spoke to me. "Mother, I went to visit father's grave." I looked at him, surprised. "I told him everything," he continued, his voice slightly trembling, "and I promised him that, from now on, I will take care of you. Truly." I smiled, a genuine smile. I took his hand. "I know, son. I know." The wound was still there. The scars would never fully heal. But among the thorny roses, new sprouts had begun to emerge. We had found a way back, a path built not on forgetting but on forgiveness and hope.